Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm Annie Emma Jean. Today I'm interviewing Tara Seren, artist, shamanic healer, homeschooling mama, and dear friend. I'll begin with the story of Sky Woman, a creation story of the peoples of the Great Lakes regions as told by Robin Wall Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass. She fell like a maple seed pirouetting on the autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from the hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear, or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below, but in that emptiness there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see that it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath to break or fall. Far from the only home she'd ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above the water for much longer, so they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gather, loons, otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest upon. Gratefully, she stepped from the goose wings onto the dome of his shell. The others understood that she needed land for her home and discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far, and after a long while he surfaced with nothing to show for his efforts. One by one the other animals offered to help, otter, beaver, sturgeon, but the depth and darkness and the pressures were too great for even the strongest of swimmers. They returned, gasping for air, with their heads ringing. Some did not return at all. Soon only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their relative, and before long a stream of bubbles rose with a small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. But then the others noticed that his paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. The turtle said, "Here, put it on my back, and I will hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving and began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew and grew as she danced her thanks, from the dab of mud on the turtle's back until the whole earth was made, not by Sky Woman alone, but from the alchemy of all the animals' gifts coupled with her deep gratitude. Together they formed what we know today as Turtle Island, our home. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she had reached out to grab onto the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were branches, fruits, and seeds of all kinds of plants. She scattered them onto the new ground and carefully tended each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight streamed through the hole from the sky world, allowing the seeds to flourish. Wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicines spread everywhere. And now that the animals too had plenty to eat, many came to live with her on Turtle Island.
Sky Woman, right? She had this transition from one world to the next, and she had support along the way. And there was a huge pivot there, complete with all the beauty and wonder and of manifesting, and the grief and sorrow of loss. So it's definitely part of the creation process. And as artists, we carry that on with us today, that artist process.
Absolutely. And it's just not one time, right? It's like the reinventation of self again and again, and the friction of the falling to the earth and what that, causes in others as well, what I think support looks like, but also what comes from that and the perceptions that come from that create us again and again.
Can we start off with like a brief sense of your origins? Like you've told me in like not so many words that you grew up kind of in a sense with your feet in two very different worlds, with your mom in Alabama and your dad here in Colorado in the Carbon Belt. Like on one hand, the Bible Belt, and on the other hand, the alive hippie culture, but you being a kid. And I wonder if you can just take a minute and describe, a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, I love that you kind of honed into that, because it really was two defining moments of trying to reconcile who am I in these moments of the teen years, where I think even if we go back and we're like, gosh, we were so much older than our teens today. Like, and I look at my son and I think, wow, 13, I was making these choices. I had grown up in the hippie vaudevillian community of Carbondale, and the time when people were hearing the call to, I guess, be closer to God, be closer to the earth, and creating what we thought was community, and being the children of that. It was both a unique experience around multiple members of family, extended family, people who were birthing ideas, being their creative selves, being raw, being one with nature. Like I never had to worry about, what I was wearing, or really like just being myself was the most important. And a lot of times just being in nature. I grew up under a blue spruce and a cottonwood and a pine. And those are like my earliest memories of creating what I felt like were the boundaries of my house, and connecting with nature. And from my earliest memories, connecting in ways that now I understand why nature and trees in particular are more my family than, the family that I've grown into. But like a lot of ideals and dreams, they become more complex than we sometimes are ready to deal with. And especially when you mix like a drug culture and growth, and our capacity to grow and our maturation from young selves, there was a lot of trauma and turmoil connected to young kids finding their way who have kids themselves. And so that rupture, brought my mother to the Bible Belt of Alabama, and which was such an extreme difference for me. So that rupture tore open something, but it also opened me up to what was the world really like outside of this, sort of Carbondale bubble. Recognizing that, there was disparities and diversities, and also like thinking about how much time I spent on a plane going back and forth to see my father from my mother, which really birthed in me a sense of independence and travel. And that
were you a teenager then?
I was 13. When I was traveling back and forth from Alabama from Tennessee to Colorado, then Alabama to Colorado, I was 10, 11, 12, 13. And I had my brother under my care. And I just think about like, there's no way I would send my kids alone on a plane today. There's just no way. There's too many things that can happen in between. And I remember being 10 years old and like, in the old Sesame Street, and the kid's walking and he's trying to remember his list for the grocery store. I got to get a quart of milk, a stick of butter, a dozen eggs, quart of milk, stick of butter, a dozen eggs. And, that's, like what my memory is of being on that plane of like, stop in Atlanta, get to the, get to the stewardess, get to the flight, watch the
That's
brother.
before we had phones that told us everything we needed to remember. We had to like print out our directions and write them and all the things.
Yeah. And I think too, though, for me at 10, it was like, I was tracking so much because it seemed like my family was so out of control that now today, when I think about, how much I track and how much I use that tracking to help others, I have really found a blossoming gift in a way that was a coping survival mechanism. So, just to finish that up, Alabama was a very jarring experience for a young hippie child, from going from, yes, ma'am, to yes, ma'am, and and that kind of discipline from a life that was so free, born from the fears, of my mother, and bless her heart, she didn't know any other way, and we grow through that. But I have used that experience to my advantage, and I'd have to say, I have a great gratitude for the support that they did have in my art. That's something like at like 10 or 11, I did receive, Bob Ross, kits, and he was such an inspiration to me, as well as all the channels on PBS where you have the sand writers and they're telling the story. And again, that coming from my mother's line, but on my father's line, I have my aunties that were storytellers and teachers and revolutionaries. And, their wild nature really inspired the spoken word for me, which has been such a gift in what I do today as well, with both my healing and my artistic presentation. So I have a lot of gratitude for what has come in the past. It's interesting how what I think came up in the direction that we're going with this podcast is what is in the pivot, what is in the Sky Woman. And so coming into my life, I feel like I was consistently Sky Woman. When I was born on an alluvial plain coming into the the Glenwood Canyon. And those are basically the great library of the history of time of this continent, and the upheaval is the only reason why we see that library in geology. And also just an alluvial plain represents consistent change. And I was born with the cord around my neck. And at that time, that was such a scary initiation into the world that doctors didn't really understand for whatever reason. There's a blind period in the medical understanding that, midwives have understood for many, many years. But, I was not with my mother for the first, half an hour of my life. And, my story is one of upheaval consistently, and learning the tracking, learning the psychic skills, coming in as a sensitive, learning how to interpret for my own at a very, very young age, has birthed these ways of the artistic process as one way to process the pain and the process of upheaval and falling, that sense of falling and that change. And then also like the transmutation process around that. And through my own journey there, I have really brought into my my skill sets a way to help people bring themselves through that process through their own transmutation.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me to hear your origin stories, and to see, how you've taken your experience and taken those seeds of of your origin experience, and just grown and used those. I mean, there's terms that you use still even, and there's when you use the word birthing the artistic process, you just gave it so much more definition to me.
Mm.
When we were on a walk one day, when this was maybe 3 years ago, and you were like, I want to be a doula. I didn't understand. I didn't have the depth of understanding. I thought you wanted to be there when babies were born. and you've taken that to mean such a beautiful thing where anyway, I don't want to jump too far ahead. We'll jump back into that in a minute. Yeah, but it's just, you have these like stunning articulations. You have such a gift for words. You have such a depth to your being. And I know that as your teenage years went by, you at one point stepped out and you started to travel the States alone with your dog and beyond. And I wonder, like, after those teenage years of, stepping in and being the very mature 10, 11, 12, and 13-year-old, probably missing some of your childhood. What was that like then when you were able to step out on your own? How old were you and where did you go? And what was that like?
Ooh, you're taking me down memory lane.
Well, I want to see those seeds. I want to look at Tara and be like, okay.
I really appreciate it. It's so much. I'm often looking into others that this journey between us has been really special, because it's like, oh wait, can I be seen, right? And so like stepping in, at 14 years old, I left what was I think a deep rupture in my life, felt like a deep rejection, but to my mother felt it was like trying to save everything that she thought was okay. And I think at that time, this was what was to be done. I think, you look back and people were prescribed cigarettes, and now we think, why were they ever smoking? Well, at this time, parents were encouraged to reform their children in the ways that they thought they should, and not really understand the maturation process of a preteen going into teen, and the rites of passage that work through that. And so I really stepped into, the fire of what a rite of passage really is. And at 14, I went home to Colorado to live with my father. And I think there was just a denial of the process for him to mature as a father because of the rupture between my family. And what opened up there was the fact that I had already matured past the sense of being able to receive parenting in the way that I think he was ready to step in. So what was cool about that, though, is that he surrendered and taught me a trade. And I stepped into working with drywall throughout the valley up into Aspen. I learned a skill set, but it also meant that I dropped out of school, and I at 15 years old was renting a trailer in town illegally, to the local bartender who we had told we were 18. But at that time, when you think back, you were living in a town of 2000, there's no way he didn't know how old we were. And life just propelled from there. And actually, I just had my kids watch Stand By Me the other day, and I was thinking, no wonder we were trying out things like the overculture and the movies and things like that. We're opening books, from Stephen King. We're opening up ideas that we kind of hadn't even thought of, and we were creating our own rites of passage work. Now, I learned a trade early on, learned to be skillful. I learned a good work ethic. The teachers in my school knew that my capabilities were beyond sometimes what a public education system could offer. And so I just threw caution to the wind. And, by 16, I had already traveled down to Mexico. I had experienced what it was like to be on the shadier sides of things, to risk your body and your well-being, and come out on the other side of that in a way that was empowering and grateful that we have those survival skills. But when we look back as parents, we never want our children to ever experience that, you know. And I remember looking at that ocean where the tide went out the furthest, and you could really see the sea anemones and the things there. And I met this man there who was homeschooling his daughter. And, you know, at that time, that was such a rogue and pioneering thing to do, to just travel and take them anywhere, you know. So that really fueled my feeling of independence and a way of educating myself through life versus through just the book or the structure of the system. And so I did. I had a dog and I started traveling. I had been to, 47 states by the time I turned 23. I had been to Egypt and gone from the top of the Nile to the base of the Nile to sit at the equator. I had sat at the bottom of the pyramids with crows, and they were my company. And yet that's when I could really remember a deep longing to share with other. That why would I be so privileged just to experience this life on my own? And having been like such a young, punk, right, is kind of the best way to put that, is this epitome of privilege in a package of this sort of blatant, F you to the world. And I got really served an understanding of what culture really was and what family really meant and the disparities that were happening in the world. So this was like a second journey, to understanding. Even though I had suffered, there was consistently more and more suffering in the world, and that I didn't want to be a tourist. I wanted to offer. And so the artistic process and the healing arts, which I find also to be an artistic process, became a way for me to offer that into the world, but inspired from those experiences where I was faced with my own privilege and needing to own, the reactionary places that led me into my own life at a young age.
And do you still have some of the art that you created from that stage of your life?
Oh, yeah. Actually, let's see. Do I still have some of the art that I created? Most of my art became something that I gave away. It became a spiritual process for me. It was never something that I believed I would ever be good at. But I did do a lot of like life drawing modeling and listening to deep poetry around the greats and things like that. So art was really a deeply spiritual process for me that I never thought that I would be successful at. So most of my art was given away. And so what I have found are really just remnants of it in dream time. And then when my father passed away, I did find remnants of these spiritual studies that I was doing that have come back to me full circle, where especially with the Mayan lineage, it makes total sense that where I have ended up in my life, in the way that I pray and in the practice. But if you had told me then that my art was beautiful and worth something, I would have said, no, I made it in the depths of my pain. And when somebody enjoyed it, I gave it to them because they could see beauty in the places that I couldn't.
I'm reminded of this quote, and we talked about this the other day. The one in Julia Cameron's book by William Bazotek or Baziotes. I hope I'm not butchering it too bad. But it says each painting has its own way of evolving. When the painting is finished, the subject reveals itself. And I wonder how that's influenced your life, or how, maybe not so much that quote, like how do you relate to that in your own words, in your life?
Well, I have to say that, painting in an earlier time in my life, like those paintings and those images within my psyche are still emerging within my dream time, within myself. They're in, like, my son's birthday is in a few days, and I saw a picture, and we used to walk, and he'd go, "Oh, Mom, I want that." I said, "Well, just take a picture, honey, because that's about as good we're going to get it. Well, I don't have a camera." So he would do this. He'd go, and it was like taking that image, and it was always forever in the psyche. And so, for me, oftentimes works of art are never finished. They're continuously evolving. And because my mind is as such, sometimes I'm tracking that, and they're still evolving from that young age. There was a time, though, that I went deep into landscape and really wanting to find the realism in that. And while I did find a lot of technique and I found realism, what the interpretation of others has been such a gift, because it's ever evolving what the subject matter is. Some people, wow, that's a really dark piece, and it was really, a light process for me. Or, wow, this is an amazing piece, but it was such a dark process for me. And then there was a time in my art where I really took another pivot, and I said, well, I'm going to paint without any reference. I just want to know what's coming through me. And I'll send you some of these pics around that, but there's a couple that stand out, both in the digital realm, painting with acrylic, and then oil, that there are maybe possibly 5 to 10 paintings within that painting alone. And I was grateful to have the foresight to take pictures of the process. But when I look back, I think those are all such different paintings, culminating into the one piece. And that it's even possible that final piece is not even done yet. And those became really visionary pieces of mine. I would have to say that the watercolor and the abstract is one of my more favorite, and most people actually really enjoy it as well, because it's so left up to the interpretation of the viewer, that there's so much freedom in the watercolor. I absolutely don't even try to contain it in form. But recently I have been trying to blend those two, where there's this watercolor aspect of it, and then when you look into it, you see that what's wanting to come through is coming through. And now taking that more refined skill set that I've worked with, and bringing those images out, have been instrumental in the evolution of my art. And I think that in this place and where I am in my life now, I am making that pivot. And it did take me to learn from teachers that, had exceptional realism skill with oils and the time it takes to have the layer upon layer. And then, having the watercolor, but looking at how can I make acrylic like watercolor, and just being really tangible in that. And, it's almost like sculpting and adding texture as well. So letting the what comes reveal has been, I think, one of the most life-changing pivots of my life. And I'm in it as well, not just on the canvas.
It's just fascinating. I'm always so, curious about, like, the origins of a life and what makes somebody who they are. And you're such a fascinating and complex human being. And you have this view of life where, like, transcendence and mystery is very, very alive. And it's just cool to look back and see, what is it that sparked that in Tara, her view of her view of the world and how we exist in it. And through your art, you've really developed this way of engaging and interacting and almost like just nourishing that in your world. I think recently of your mural that you did. You recently moved to a new town, and you had this huge pivot as you moved away from what was known to the unknown in faith. And as you came to your new town, you were welcomed with this opportunity to create a mural, which and then was celebrated and honored, and people were curious, who is this woman who moved to town? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was pretty special actually, like because I have fallen and reinvented myself so much, like Sky Woman. I want to really honor her like that because it's just the truth. And again, even in the process of moving here to Cedar Edge, and even a year later now, it's almost like this consistent falling and reinventing self, and this trust and the recognition that I've reinvented myself 1,000 times. Like I've been to a funeral of an old friend, and they said, "Oh my God, T, look at all the old pictures of you," and I think it's in here. Like I am not that woman anymore. I have been 1,000 women since, or 1,000 beings since. And my realm of the unseen, my time with the longing, my support and feeling of the family of the earth, and now coming into this place of trust and humanity, of like, okay, these beings have taught me how to respond, right? So when I saw the call for the mural, I responded. When my neighbor said, "Who is this person? You should connect and get a spotlight on that." Like maybe when I was younger, I might have thought, "No, it's not. I'm not worthy. It's not good enough." Now it's like this call and this respond. I have learned through this artistic process that there's value not just in the visual but in the process, and there's value in sharing it. There's value in being out, even if I don't feel perfect or whole in myself completely, and there's going to be a lot of time as well to be fully received, like giving myself that time to really fully receive it. Like even in your reflection back to me, like sometimes I'm so much in the response and in the action, it's hard to step back and look at the amazing things you've created. Like I'm full circle out here. I worked on the parade of homes out here in Grand Junction. And, I have worked on many, many homes in Aspen. And even in those aspects, I was doing texture in the drywall. And if I was working on a priest's home, I was putting the artistic process of the cross and the things inside the textures. If I was working on the Cancer Research Center in Seattle, I was putting spirals of growth into those walls. And so, many years later, I revisit with someone who had been there, and I feel like that message is coming back to me, that somebody has witnessed the growth in the walls and have come through their own journey. And I think that's something that I'm finding here is connecting with the slowing of the process, that every little step is something sacred and special. And maybe I won't know what is to be revealed of it until, one, it emerges for me, and the time it takes to know what it has meant for others, right?
Mm-hmm. And you do have such an amazing way with people. I feel, you say, and looking back, you can see it's that 2020 vision, that when we look back at things, we can see. And I think there's a part of that other people can see too while you're going through it. And I feel like I see this person, this Tara, in this new community, just making this beautiful way with her special gifts. Her special gifts of helping other people, and accompanying others through the artistic process in a communal way. And that process can be messy and it can be difficult, and it takes a special skill to know and to be able to patiently sit there with a person and let them have their experience and not take it personally, and be in the communal way with people who, as I always say Julia Way, but it's Julia Cameron who did the Artist Way, would say, blocked creatives who maybe people who are don't believe that they are creatives, but I believe that we're all creative. We all have that gift. I think Elizabeth Gilbert puts it as, we are the creative ape. And Rick Rubin says, what does he say? He says, we all have it in us to be creative at any time. And it's a hard thing to believe, right? Not everybody believes it about themselves, but when people come to you in the communal way, in the drum way, you believe it of them. You see it in them and you sit with them. And I'm curious, what when did you start doing the drum circles?
Well, I started creating, I've always created. So I've always found feathers and bones and things, and growing up, hitchhiking or around the trains and things like that's, in the wilds of life, that's what you find is death and birth, like all the time. And so, like revisiting that doula aspect as well. I've always been a doula, but when I decided I wanted to be one, the teacher that I chose to learn from was because she fostered trust in the process, trust in the person that you're with. And that has been the foundation of all of the practices that I do, even though I had been working with it for a long time. Her words of trust what occurs has been one of the most influential pieces in my work. Now,
maybe I missed, who is she? I think I missed that.
Oh, I didn't say Wapio and the Matrona and the quantum birthing. She taught me, and through the lineage of trusting what occurs, a woman who has, been privy to over 500 births and had home births and has maybe had a couple complications, and that's pretty phenomenal. And her whole premise on this is, trusting what occurs, trust the person that you're with. If you're going to come in and they're eating peanut butter jelly and Kool-Aid, that's what you're going to eat too, And I think that comes into a lot of the work that I do, is a lot of rejection and things in the galleries and stuff. It was like, you don't have a style. I never went to art school to find a style. I dabbled in the arts to find what I liked, what was my experience with that, right? And pretty much with the artistic process in general, my experience has been far more what I go into it for than the end result. And so when I was not able to, show in galleries in a way that the art world like really embraced me, a lot of times they said things like, you're so diverse. I cannot believe you painted this painting and that painting. Like they are so two different styles, right? And I thought, well, isn't that my style, right? That diversity is my style. That I started to, do creations for my own tool sets. Like I'm not one to just go buy a drum. I want to know what it feels like to get my hands into that and what is really happening. And I my first drum that I ever made, I brought into my world through my birthday. And again, like just sitting at that space of, like of Egypt and that deep longing to share things with others, right? And that was what's coming through me when I'm birthing the drum. And I was singing and I was praying and I was going through it, and I created it and it was too tight. And then I had to do it again. And, and it was all this process, but it was also the tracking of the spiritual sense of all the cultural knowledge that I have understood and, walked through, and my studies and in my experiences. And so when I came back to this and I refined it, I realized that there's a lot here to share with others. And
So that's what drew you to sit with others then in the drum way?
In ways, I had an experience. I don't want to just go back to the speak that you said, that we're all apes, creative apes, and then creativity is within each of us. So there's many different things that I offer in this world, but I will say one of the schools of thoughts of why apes became creative is that they ate that forbidden fruit, that sacred mushroom, and it opened up the temporal lobes of our brain for language and artistic expression. And so fast forward, I did a lot of studies of these things, culture, history, psychedelics, entheogens, plant medicines, holistic health, and diverse cultural modalities. Well, while that I never became that naturopath doctor, and I do still have those modalities that I work with, they all influence my art in really huge ways. And so while I wasn't in the galleries, what came to me at another falling and pivot point in my life when I decided to sit with ayahuasca and the DMT was this opening of people who wanted and had interest in how do I create sacred items. And people just started coming to me. I don't know that I decided to do it. They said, well, nobody's teaching this and you're really good at it and I could buy it from you, but it seems like there's far more of a process here for you. So it started with what I call the dream weavers, where we worked with the sacred geometry of what we are weaving into our life and understanding the passion and the perspective of what we're not denying our shadow selves. We are embracing the process of everything that makes us who we are and seeing that sacred geometry at the end. And then drums became that for me. Now, it is another thing that, like you said, like you start in the abstract and it reveals itself. I started in ceremony and the people came, and what it did was revealed itself to, and not just as a piece of art, but as an artistic process where I've seen people who are high overachievers that have excelled in the academic world, and people who are, total wizards and abstract free beings come into the same circle with all different life backgrounds. Like, this is why coaching never worked for me either. It's like, find your target audience. I might work with somebody who is in the high government offices, as well as somebody who's just coming fresh off the hippie street life, and sit together with them and never see a discordant moment, that there is something that everybody has to offer to that process. And the unwinding that happens when we come in and create something. So we could have gone 40 years and be a doctor in a top of our game business owner, and and just not understand why I haven't achieved this, and I've worked so hard and I haven't gotten here, and I'm tightly wound. And then they come in and all of that is put into the unwinding, untangling, and then the reshaping and molding of that process in the drum and the creation of it. And that's where we get to birth ourselves, because we actually get to put it down, let it unfold and unwind, and then reshape that process. There's just something that happens in the brain somatically, that we aren't tightly wound up in it, and we get to let it go. And it's also in the process of an organic and uncontrolled environment. And some people feel really free in that and find that they have to find organization within the chaos, and that this is their time to find that. And the threading of the drums really embodies that. And then there's times where people say, I need to know this step by step by step. And it's the wildness of the organic nature of trusting what occurs, that there's so much healing and opening. There's a window that opens there for them. And so there's so much in the artistic process that mirrors birth, transition, and death, and what I call the veils in that. And it's just a matter of tracking and trusting the process and slowing it down. Like, whether you're putting, paint to the canvas, or you're threading sinew, or you're moving the rawhide through the holes, like, these are all bits and pieces that bring something that we aren't necessarily aware of to the alchemical process that's missing when we're just looping it through our minds.
It's so interesting to listen to you talk and to hear your way, which is different than other people's ways. And it does show that the real practice of the artist is a way of being in the world. And that there is a way of being in the world where the tension between playfulness and structure, the tension that exists between schedules and openness, right? It does have a way that can happen together, right? We can interact and engage with our playful self in a space. And it just, to me, it just really highlights how your story of origin, how your beginnings and the paths that you have decided to travel and been on and listened to and grown from have influenced your view of the world, this view that's allowed transcendence, that's allowed mystery, that's allowed time space for that open, playful creativity and processing and opening. And it's interesting, I ask, what did you see that was missing in the world? And you're like, well, I don't think it's something so much that I saw as this thing that came to me, this opportunity that I stepped into to provide, to be a nurturer to the artist process for these human beings. We can come together and sit together and be in a way where we can transcend our own shortcomings and, be they what they may. But we can sit together and find them. And I think that's part of it, is just identifying our little blocks that cause us to be, I'm not a creative person. I don't do that. But when we sit with it, we do have to look at that to make our drum. And so I can see how you ended up in this place now. And in a way, we've kind of reverse engineered your life a little bit here, right? And it's just interesting watching what you've learned and seeing how far you've come and how many times you've experienced the pivot and the transition, and how it has informed your view of the world and how you exist in the world.
It's a deep trust, but it's also very interesting. It's because when people come, I never stop them from feeling their despair. I never stop them from feeling their doubt. I don't come in and say, no, this is who you are. I'm going to help you see it, right? I'm going to just see them for who they are, because so much of what I have come to trust was born out of those things for me. Deeply sensitive, deeply feeling person. And one thing I want to say is that I really enjoy the interview with Rick Rubin and Krista Tippett, because there was something in him that I saw in myself, where when we sit with very diverse people and bring a space of creativity where you seemingly may have conflict, there can be born something super radical and new and life-changing, world-changing. That he says that there's this deep anxiety he gets up into the point, and you never know when it's coming. Like, you have to stay open to the fact that I can't actually put a deadline on it. I have to have an internal deadline, but I have to be open to what occurs, what comes. And that I have to be, sitting there in this, I know we're going to get from A to B. I know we're going to have a birth, but I don't know what that's going to look like. And the anxiety in there is this preparation to be ready, to be open to what occurs. And there's a process that I feel like I've now matured into, to understand the veils and the aspects of that process, to trust the anxiety in self versus react from it. But there's also an unwinding and a dialogue and a dance. Like, I have seen people climb trees and roll around in the earth and paint their menstrual blood on their drums and on their faces, and reach the umbilical cords to the altar and shape the altar and say, for 3 hours I hated you, but now I love you and thank you for being here, and not distrusting the process and just leaving. There's so much that happens in the projections of others, and then there's a processing and an unwinding. And I think the drums really, really, really bring that template for me, that when I trust that other people's stuff, that they come in with the baggage, that there's space for them to have it, there is a dance that they do that one becomes now a part of my bundle and altar. Like, people put their umbilical cords to the altar from the drums. I didn't say this is okay, it's the birthing process, this is what you do. And they did that, and their birthing pains, I've seen men birthing in birthing pains. Now all of a sudden the men are bringing their menstrual blood, which happens to be this beautiful elderberry dye that came from our work, right? From the elderberry, and they put it on their drums because they saw the woman bringing the menstrual blood, and now they know what to do with it, and they even put it at the base of the tree in that prayer way. But that doesn't mean, but Tara, I've walked in the feminine way, and I'm coming back to the masculine, and that was a reclamation of that for them. It wasn't being like, oh, men are bad and now you must be woman. This was men being men. And I got to witness this new bundle, and that this is part of the bundle now, and that every single person down that lineage and line that has sat, over 50 drums have been born, and everybody has brought something to it.
And what a beautiful, strong person it takes to sit with people during that time. It's not anybody that can go and sit and allow someone to have that experience. It's a special person with fortitude, with wisdom, with a lot of life experience, who sat with it and gone through the fire, jumped over the fire, who sat with it, that can sit with those people, not those people, but can sit with people as they process in their true way, what they need, what they bring to the table. And you said it, you're like, I didn't tell them to do that. I don't tell them who they're going to be. And you absolutely don't. You would just allow the process, which is, it takes a lot of knowing, and it takes a lot of Tara to have that experience. And it's just, I've appreciated this time with you to really dive into what makes you who you are, how you tick, and gives you your strengths and how you, and so here's my question. what's next, Tara? Where are you going? Are you gonna keep sitting in the drum way? I mean, what's your next pivot? I mean, I know it's part of the process and it's been beautiful, and I can see you sitting with this. I can see you growing this. I can see so many different things, but what's just the next step?
Well,
Do you know, or are you trusting? Just to,
well, I feel like I'm trusting. I feel like what's revealing is people wanting to step into this and hold those similar ways of holding. And so I'm in a place where there's spirit, and it's real, and it's unseen, and it's unknown. And then there's science, and it's really measurable. Like, it's pretty darn accurate every time. And there's this space of trusting into the risking of it. And we live at a huge risk-oriented time of our life, which is in the arc of time, probably what may be like a renaissance, right? Where so much of the artistic process is born out of the strife of what people are experiencing right now. And so there's a lot of people blossoming into the places where I have walked and paved a path. Even if it looks hidden, it's still there. And so what's happening is people are asking me to share and teach that process. And I know that that's part of that path, that I'm going to be giving this wisdom to others to go out and do that on their own, because it's just that time where you're not out there on the ground lines, doing all the bandaging and the stitching and the sewing and all the things, right? Like, this is a time where people are coming to learn to build their tools, and that they are warriors of the heartbeat. And that's what I tell people when they come. And now those drums are drumming, right? And those people are creating with the sense of security and certainty that if they risk it and they fall, new life will be created. This is Spock going into Genesis. This is, I'll just end with this piece that was one of the biggest stories of my childhood that took me to devotional painting, that has taken me on what my gene key is, the life of devotion and commitment. Siddhartha, and the experience of saying, yes, you could have it all right now because of this privilege. But we rebel, and we step into friction, and we experience multifaceted pieces of life, because when we come back to sit with others, we can truly understand where they've been, and that there is this place in the process. And I think for me, there's a time too where Siddhartha sits under that tree and says, oh, I can apply this to me, right? And so there's a maturation within me, and the application of that, and that's being reflected around me in my life and my community. So what is next for me? When you put a paintbrush down for a while because that stroke may be a little too challenging, and then 30 years later you come back and you pick it up, and it's like the simplest thing you could have ever done, and now you're on to the next part of that painting, and it's exploded, and your style has emerged, and people are really feeling the flower of that beautiful dahlia, right? I feel like that's where I'm at, and it's not something that I want to necessarily contain. I really just want to trust what occurs for that, and hold that space for my own self to emerge. And I feel so very grateful that I have come to this place of witnessing so many lives emerge from just simply watching them, giving them witness. That's what I'm affording myself at this time.
It's so beautiful, and just the strength to have such incredible vulnerability and to step into the experimentation. And with all its possible outcomes, which could be in massive success as well as impasse and failure. I mean, there's just so much beauty in that vulnerability, and I just, you shine so brightly because of it, because you've opened to that, and you just keep going and you share it with others. So appreciate you, Tara, and I appreciate you sharing that with me today, and those people that will listen.
Yeah, thank you, Annie, for your beautiful way of holding me and guiding me through this process. As you know, sometimes that's even more vulnerable than we know, just to let somebody walk you through what they've witnessed about you. And so, I get to have that. I get to receive that, and I'm very grateful. I feel like we did this in a beautiful, graceful way. I'm looking forward to hearing the story of Sky Woman at the beginning. Read by you, because that's what you chose to represent this conversation, and I appreciate it deeply.
My pleasure, love. Mwah.
Mwah.
Thank you for listening to the Full Circle podcast. Connect with Tara at bodyworkbytara.com and taraseren.wixsite.com/shine. Produced and edited by me, Annie.